Pop quiz, hotshot! What's the most dramatic moment of a movie story? Well, duh, you say, it's the big Act 3 climax. Okay, then what's the second most dramatic moment? Alright, cool breeze, you know about the climax, so what should happen at that climax? Well, hey, you say, it's the big event that brings everything to an end. Okay then, what should happen at the second most dramatic moment? Well, if you've been reading up on your screencraft, you might have correctly guessed I'm talking about what happens right here, 3/4 of the way into the story at the end of Act 2B turning point. And if you've been reading some junky screencraft that treats story like a recipe for grandma's bundt cake, you might call this the all is lost moment! The all is lost moment, where everything seems so dire and there's no way out. Well, that's one way to do it, but it's not the only way. While the all is lost might work great in some situations, if you try to cram it into a story where it doesn't belong, it just won't work. There are in fact many effective ways to throw your story into its final act. However, 5 strategies are most common in Hollywood movies. So in this video, I'm going to describe these 5 strategies so you can decide what works best for your own story. Starting off, what exactly is the end of Act 2B turning point and what should it do? Well, going back once again to the basics, a traditional Hollywood-style movie story gets its structural geometry from the arrangement of 5 major dramatic events. You got the inciting incident, the end of Act 1 turning point, the midpoint, the end of Act 2B turning point, and the Act 3 climax. What folks call the story's acts are really just the courses of action between these events. See, it's actually the events that give a story its sense of structure, not the acts between them. Now, every one of these major events functions as a turning point. That means something occurs to literally turn the story in a new direction by bringing the previous course of action to an end and launching the next course of action to follow. However, if you've been watching my videos, you'll know that each of these events also has its own special story function. The inciting incident introduces the problematic situation, the end of Act 1 functions as the point of no return, and the midpoint presents a crisis which essentially splits the story in two. Now the turning point at the end of Act 2B sits at the doorway of the story's big final act. So its special job is to throw the story into its final stage with the most momentum possible. And the best way to do this is with a sudden reversal of emotions. I don't usually like it when people use the roller coaster analogy for story structure, but in this case it's appropriate. Just as a roller coaster gains its maximum speed by suddenly reversing its vertical direction, a story gains its maximum velocity by suddenly reversing its emotional direction. From joy to anguish, from despair to hope, from happiness to heartbreak. And many movies get the most explosive reversal of emotions through Hollywood's most commonly used strategy. This is the one you're probably most familiar with, as it's been done so often over recent decades. We're talking about the dark moment, or the all is lost moment. Act 2B ends with some major setback for the protagonist, or the arrival of some insurmountable crisis. At the moment, things seem really bleak. The situation has become so bad, the protagonist is either backed into a corner, or on the edge of defeat, or ready to completely throw in the towel. For example, in Shrek, Shrek has fallen in love with Fiona, but due to a misunderstanding, Shrek gives up Fiona and retreats back into self-isolation. It now seems Shrek will be unhappy forever. Or in The Shawshank Redemption, when the warden crushes Andy's hopes of freedom. Andy's now trapped, both literally and figuratively, in a deep, dark hole. However, by itself, the dark moment doesn't give enough for a true reversal of emotions. That's why it's always followed by its counterpart, the spark of hope. The spark of hope is some subsequent development, revelation, or realization by the protagonist, which cracks open a window to offer one last chance, one brief opportunity or possible solution to still climb out of the darkness and seize victory. While this is often a total long shot filled with risk and danger, the protagonist has no choice but to throw aside all doubts and fears and put everything on the line. Like in Shawshank, Andy realizes the time has come to enact an extreme plan of action. He's going to escape Shawshank Prison. In Shrek, after a good talking to by Donkey, Shrek gains the courage to disrupt the wedding and proclaim his love to Fiona. Despite all this uncertainty, the protagonist's spirits are lifted. They are now determined, even cautiously optimistic, to make the most of this one last chance. Hence the reversal of emotions, from the depths of despair to the highest of hopes. However, the dark spark's been so overused in recent decades that a lot of viewers now consider it cliché. But a story can achieve the same reversal of emotions by simply flipping things around using our next strategy. The false victory presents the inverse situation of a dark spark. Here, instead of failure, Act 2B ends in success. Through some great triumph, it now seems that victory is now at hand, that the antagonist has been defeated, or at least things are on their way to a happy ending. But then, disaster strikes. A new crisis arises, the antagonist returns, or some unexpected challenge now blocks the road to victory. We get a classic example in Rare's The Lost Ark. Indy has stolen back the Ark, and now he and Marion are on a ship back to America. Everything seems hunky-dory. But then, reversal of emotions. The bad guys reappear and steal the Ark once again. Indy now has no choice but to throw himself back into the fray. We get the same strategy in The Matrix. Neo and Trinity have rescued Morpheus. It seems they've pulled one over on the agents and will get away scot-free. But then...
Mr. Anderson.
Sudden, unexpected crisis. The once certain victory is now a fight for Neo's life. The dark spark and the false victory create the biggest reversals of emotion, and thus can generate the most momentum. However, they're not suited for every type of story, and trying to artificially contrive one just to get that big reversal can actually harm the integrity of the narrative. Luckily, there are 3 other strategies. This strategy works well for stories with a heavy element of mystery. Now, I don't just mean mystery stories per se, but any story that generates its drama by withholding story information and then having characters discover it later on at key points, which might include thrillers, spy stories, a lot of sci-fi and action, even some romance and comedy. However, this is a strategy that must be planned out from the very start. And the key piece of the puzzle, an absolutely pivotal piece of story information, has been kept hidden, usually from both the main character and the audience. This big secret is then revealed at the end of Act 2B, and this bombshell does 2 things. First, it completely transforms the way both we and the main character understand the story situation. Second, with this new information, the protagonist now knows exactly what they must do in the final act. The most notorious example is Roman Polanski's Chinatown. I'm not going to give away the secret for spoiler's sake because it is indeed a bombshell. But with this information, Jake Gittes now not only understands how the entire mystery fits together, but now knows exactly what he must do if truth and goodness are to win the day. For a less shocking example, we'll use Die Hard. Die Hard creates a long-standing mystery over the final phase of Hans's plan, and why he's so interested in the rooftop. At the end of Act 2B, John McClane gets curious as well, and finds the rooftop wired with a buttload of explosives. With this reveal, we now know Hans plans to blow up the hostages, and John knows he now must act quickly to avert this tragedy. Likewise, in Alien, at the end of Act 2B, Ripley discovers it's all been a big betrayal. Her corporate bosses wanted them to bring the monster aboard the ship. With this and some further revelations, Ripley now knows what she must do: destroy the ship and the creature along with it. The key piece of the puzzle is of course specialized to the types of story that have such a big secret to reveal. For those that don't, we can simplify the whole matter with our 4th strategy. Here, the events of Act 2B have more or less wrapped themselves up, either for the better or for the worse, and Act 3 begins with the characters initiating some big plan, some final mission or complex course of action that they hope will finally resolve the story situation. It's kind of a puzzle piece minus the big secret. So, like in Star Wars, Act 2B ends with Luke and pals escaping the Death Star and getting the stolen plans to the Rebel Army. So, Act 3 begins with the launch of a massive assault using these plans to destroy the Death Star. Similarly, in Back to the Future, Marty manages to put everything back in its proper place by the end of Act 2B. So with that done, Act 3 begins with the final stage of the plan, getting Marty back to 1985. Dramatically speaking, the launch of the final plan is one of the weaker ways to move into Act 3, as it generally lacks any reversal of emotions. And we can actually feel this weakness in both Star Wars and Back to the Future. There's this real lull in the action at the start of Act 3 that takes some time to build up momentum once again, which is exactly what you don't want at this point in the story. However, when done well, the launch of the final plan can still send us into the final act with sufficient momentum. Because if your story can't provide a reversal of emotions, the next best thing is to set up a sense of anticipation for what is to come. Take a look at The Godfather. Throughout Act 2B, Michael is warned that his enemies will attack soon after his father dies. Act 3 begins with his father's funeral, where we see Michael's enemies conspiring against him. We know Michael is about to launch a big plan, but are left wondering what it is and whether it'll succeed. Likewise, while some uses of the key piece of the puzzle do generate a reversal of emotions, like in Chinatown, others have to rely on setting up dread and anticipation, like in Die Hard. We know the clock is ticking and wonder if John will save everyone in time. Now, you might have noticed that all these strategies are pretty darn Hollywood. They fit stories with surprise twists and turns, big secrets to reveal, major missions to launch. But, not all stories are of this type, such as those that really care more about exploring their characters. But fear not, because there's one more option. It's the weakest dramatically, but it can still set up a sense of anticipation and a desire to know what's to come. With this final strategy, Act 2B once again comes to some sort of momentary conclusion, again for the better or for the worse. Then, through some narratory device, the film indicates that A, we are moving into the story's final stage, and B, something very important is going to happen when we reach its end. Exactly what this something might be, we may or may not know. In any case, we've set up anticipation. We get a good example in 1999's American Beauty. Act 3 begins with a shot echoing the beginning of the film, indicating that we're about to come full circle. We then hear Lester Burnham declare in voiceover that today will be the last day of his life. See, what's happening is the story is directly addressing its audience to say we have entered the story's final day, and at the end Lester will die. However, we do not yet know how or why, thus establishing anticipation. We find the same strategy in Goodfellas. Previously, Goodfellas summarized years and years of Henry Hill's life with key moments here and there. But Act 3 begins with this. This sticks out. Not only is this the first time title cards been used in the entire movie, but this is the first time events are to be broken down on an hour-by-hour basis. This suggests that not only are we entering a new stage of the story, but that something very important is going to happen at the end of this day. The fact that we don't know what it is creates anticipation. But of course, there's no hard boundaries between these strategies. You can mix it up. Say a spark of hope can come by revealing a puzzle piece, or a character can respond to a false victory by launching a big plan. And of course, this isn't to say there aren't other ways to transition into Act 3. Hollywood simply uses these strategies the most due to their proven ability to generate dramatic momentum. And momentum is exactly what you want at this point. A good movie shouldn't just peter along until it finally ends. It keeps viewers glued to their seats by sending that roller coaster hurtling downhill into an exciting and emotional end. So what's your favorite example of a good end of Act 2B turning point? Let me know down in the comments along with any questions you might have. That about wraps things up for traditional Hollywood act structure, but there's still a lot more to get into, especially if you want to get down the whole nitty-gritty of things. So make sure you're subscribed and click the like button to help spread the word. So until next time, I'm the Script Monk. Arrivederci.
The all is lost moment!